Some of you might have heard this before, but I have another channel called Business Blaze, and that actually led to the development of this very product. Long story short, I made a joke about how YouTubers will have these beauty lines, and a fan of that channel emailed me saying, Simon, you should make a beauty line, but you should make some beard oil because you have a magnificent beard. And I was like, I agree. And so we made Beard Blaze. Beard Blaze makes a full, luscious beard a reality, solving all of life's problems with fine facial hair. Not a guarantee. What happened is I teamed up with a fan of that channel called Will. He sent me a bunch of samples of beard oil. I tried them all in my beard. I found the ones that worked best for me, and then we made a whole range of them. I've used a lot of beard oils over the last few years, and basically I'm a bit biased, but I think this is the best one that I've ever tried. Also, I always noticed that beard oils tend to come in tiny little bottles and be super expensive. So we made a proper size bottle and we made it at a proper price. You can go to beardblaze.com to find out more about that. No discount codes, nothing special like that, because this is from me. You could just go to the website and try it out. Then let's get into the video. I'm a liar, a cheat, a charlatan, but at least I know it. Those are the words of James Randi, illustrating his unique, direct, and honest outlook on life. Randi trained and worked as a magician for most of his life, and a pretty successful one too, but then decided to retire from magic and become a professional debunker. So what did he debunk? Well, pretty much everything that had to do with the paranormal. Psychics, mediums, faith healers, fortune tellers, spoon benders, they all practiced what Randi called woo-woo. Having spent most of his life in the world of magic, Randi knew all of their secrets and how to use them against the people claiming to have supernatural powers. Randi himself preferred to be called an investigator rather than a debunker, arguing that the latter already proclaimed to know something was false and set out to show everyone else, while the former merely investigated specific claims from an objective starting point. In other words, Randi did not deal in absolutes and did not outright dismiss entire concepts like magic or faith healing, just the people who claimed to be doing them. In this regard, most famous of all was his $1 million paranormal challenge. The premise was simple. Come to his institute, prove any kind of supernatural ability under supervised laboratory-controlled conditions, and win $1 million. The prize ended in 2015, unclaimed. James Randi was born Randall James Hamilton Zwinge on August 7, 1928, in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. He was one of 3 children to George Zwinge and Marie Paradis. He adopted James Randi as his name later in life, but for simplicity's sake, we're going to refer to him like that from now on. His skeptical and inquiring mind showed up from an early age as he routinely got in trouble at Sunday school for constantly asking for proof while his teacher read things from the Bible. Things went a bit differently in regular school, where Randi showed a great aptitude for learning, but he advanced so far ahead of his class that eventually he grew bored and started skipping school, mainly showing up only to take exams. This provided Randi with a lot of free time, which he needed to fill with something. He visited a lot of museums and public libraries, and also frequented many matinee shows. He went to one when he was 12 years old, and it forever altered the course of his life. It was a magic show performed by one of America's greatest stage magicians, Harry Blackstone Sr. The experience had an enchanting effect on young Randi, and he now knew what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. Like most magicians, he started out small, mostly doing kids' birthday parties. He became successful as a mentalist, and by the time he was 17 years old, Randi already began performing in local nightclubs after dropping out of high school. Around this time, he got his first experience as a debunker when he attended a spirit church in Toronto, where the preacher claimed to read the minds of his parishioners by predicting what statements they wrote down on papers placed inside sealed envelopes. This was accomplished using a simple and common mentalism trick known as one ahead, which, as the name implies, allows the performer to always learn one fact ahead of the ones that they present out loud. All that is necessary for the trick to work is for the mentalist to already know one of the statements before the performance starts. This can be accomplished through multiple ways. They could use sleight of hand, they could sneak a peek inside an envelope, or simplest of all, they could have an accomplice in the audience who would say the fake statement belongs to them, regardless of what it is. So the mentalist begins their performance by mind-reading the first statement, which is fake. The plant in the audience says, "That one's mine," and the performer then opens the envelope, which the audience thinks contains that statement, but of course it doesn't. None of them do, but in doing so, the mentalist reads and learns the actual statement that was in the envelope. At that point, the hard work is already done. The mentalist is one ahead, so he picks up another envelope and mind-reads it, but says the true statement that they learnt from the previous one. This, of course, will get a positive response from someone in the audience, so the performer opens the envelope and learns another true statement. And so it goes until the end. It doesn't matter if there are 5 envelopes or 500, the mentalist can do them all in a row because they will always know one true statement ahead of the ones presented. Even though Randi had been practicing magic for a few years at this point, he could easily spot the con and got very angry with the preacher. He looked at the people around him and saw many of them having emotional reactions, some with tears streaming down their face because they truly believed their preacher had supernatural powers, and all the while he was simply deceiving them for money. Randi ran up on stage, interrupted the performance, and explained how the trick was done, but the reaction he received was not the one he was expecting. The people were not grateful. They didn't suddenly realize that they were being lied to. Instead, they booed the young magician and told him that he was wrong. The preacher's wife called the police, and Randi was arrested for his efforts. That day, he learned a hard but important lesson. One of the main reasons why everything he deemed woo-woo worked so well was deep down, people wanted to believe in them, even if it meant being deceived. Looking back on it, James Randi reflected that that was the event that set him on the path of a professional skeptic. For the moment, Randi was still focused on his burgeoning career as a magician. Despite his initial foray into mentalism, he switched specialties to escapology because people kept on believing he had genuine psychic powers, despite his insistence that he was merely performing tricks. He had people walk up to him and ask for lotto numbers or stock tips, and if he said that he was just a magician, they would reply with a sarcastic, "Sure you are," with a wink and a nudge. Randi did not like this experience. He felt uncomfortable, as he understood the true power he held over his audience and how easily it could be abused for fame and fortune by someone less scrupulous than him. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Randi built up a reputation as one of the most popular magicians in North America, although he toured in Europe and Asia. He still went by his real name, Randall Zwinge, at this point, although he later changed it to the Amazing Randi after a Quebec newspaper referred to him as L'Étonnant Randi. His most popular tricks, stunts, and illusions all had an element of danger to them that kept the audience on its toes, even when some of them lasted for over half an hour. Randi later admitted that at this stage in his career, he was driven by a desire to outdo Harry Houdini, to last longer than him and make it more dangerous than he did. One of Randi's most popular stunts took place in 1955 when he got tied up in a straitjacket, turned upside down, and lifted 6 stories into the air over Broadway. He escaped in 2.5 minutes, and later he would perform a similar daring feat, except that he was hung upside down over Niagara Falls. In 1974, Randi set a Guinness World Record for staying naked inside a block of ice for 43 minutes and 8 seconds. All of his successes translated into crossover appeal for Randi, who made numerous TV, radio, and stage appearances. During the 1960s, he was a popular guest on the children's television show Wonderama. In 1973, he joined Alice Cooper on his $1 Billion Babies tour, appearing in each show as the executioner who decapitated Cooper using a trick guillotine that he designed. But really, it was one show in particular which helped turn Randi into a household name: The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. In his younger years, Carson had trained as a magician, and he also shared Randi's skepticism when it came to supernatural claims. The two formed a close friendship, and Randi became one of Johnny Carson's favorite guests, appearing over 30 times on The Tonight Show during Carson's tenure as host. But of course, magic did not end up being James Randi's main claim to fame. Ever since he was a teenager, he promised that one day, when he was famous and at a large platform, he would use his knowledge and influence to expose the people he perceived as being dishonest. It was during the 1970s that Randi's career pivoted from magic to focusing mainly on paranormal investigations. We cannot say what Randi's first debunking attempt was, but we can certainly say which one made him famous. In 1972, he began a rivalry that would pretty much last for his entire life, one against Uri Geller. Born in Tel Aviv, Geller was at the time a popular and charismatic illusionist and mentalist, known mainly for his act of bending spoons right in front of his audience simply by holding them. However, he claimed to do this, as well as his other feats, by using genuine psychic powers. This bothered Randi, so he called out Geller and then challenged his powers on an infamous 1973 episode of The Tonight Show. Like we already mentioned, Johnny Carson was a bit of a skeptic himself. Uri Geller was supposed to be a guest on the show and was slated to perform his spoon bending, so Carson asked James Randi for help to prevent any trickery. Randi's solution was pretty straightforward: just do not let him use his own spoons. Have the show provide the props without telling Geller and without letting him or anyone else from his team handle them prior to the taping. The result was a predictable one, a slow and embarrassing 20-minute segment where Geller failed to make the spoons even twitch slightly before finally abandoning the task, saying that he did not feel strong that night. The show was described in the New York Times as a legendary immolation in which Geller offered up flustered excuses to his host as his abilities failed him again and again. "I sat there for 22 minutes, humiliated," Geller told me when I spoke to him in September. "I went back to my hotel, devastated. I was about to pack up the next day and go back to Tel Aviv. I thought, that's it. I'm destroyed." You would think that such a performance would spell the end for Geller's career, but it actually had the opposite effect. It gave it a big boost, proof once again that people want to believe these feats are real, even in the face of clear evidence to the contrary. Geller's supporters argued that if his spoon bending was just a magic trick, then surely he'd be able to repeat it every time, whereas true psychic powers would be more fickle than that. Weak. Wow. Therefore, in their minds, the fact that Geller could not bend spoons that night was proof that he could bend spoons. This was only the start of Randi's efforts to debunk Geller's claims, but he faced an uphill battle as it seems like people were willing to believe in his supernatural powers no matter what. In 1978, he published an article in New Scientist about Yasha Katz, Geller's former manager, who first brought him to international fame. Katz described many ways in which he claimed to have helped Geller achieve his illusions, starting out by simply talking to people to obtain private information, which he later relayed to Geller to make it seem like it came to him via ESP. For a TV show in San Francisco, Katz said that he secretly looked inside a sealed envelope to tell Geller the contents before the start of the show. During a meeting with a London publisher, Katz left the phone off the hook so Geller could hear what was being said from a different room. During a live show in Birmingham, he alleged to have faked a bomb scare so that Geller would not have to perform after finding out that the front row of the audience consisted mainly of professional magicians. This was not enough to convince the true believers, though. In 1975, Randi wrote a whole book titled The Magic of Uri Geller, which challenged the psychic's claims of paranormal powers. But that was still not enough. If Randi was going to get serious about his career as a professional skeptic, he was going to need help. Magicians have a long-standing tradition of debunking, even prior to James Randi. In his later years, Harry Houdini became an ardent enemy of mediums who claimed to speak with the dead. Before him, one of the 20th century's most influential magicians, John Neville Maskelyne, began his career by exposing two spiritualist brothers who performed illusions and claimed to have supernatural powers. After Randi's time, he passed the baton to other performers such as Penn and Teller or Banachek. That being said, in his own time, Randi didn't exactly receive unwavering support from his fellow magicians for his investigative efforts. Some were annoyed that he was exposing so many tricks of the trade, while others were content with knowing the truth for themselves and didn't see the point in going to all that trouble to reveal others as frauds. Therefore, Randi sought assistance from other fields, particularly the scientific community, who was, by and large, also against claims of paranormal phenomena. In 1976, James Randi co-founded the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, or CSI-COP, which later changed its name to the Pythia Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, or CSI. The organization promoted scientific skepticism, especially when it came to claims of the paranormal, but it also personally investigated numerous claims of such supernatural activities. Besides Randi, other founders included Professor Paul Kurtz, who came up with the idea for PsyCop, Professors Ray Hyman and Marcello Truzzi, psychologist B.F. Skinner, writers Isaac Asimov and Martin Gardner, and astronomer Carl Sagan. Of them all, James Randi was the one most willing to travel the globe to debunk fraudulent claims, and according to Hyman, Randi became the ambassador of PsyCop and the face of the skeptical movement all over the world. One of Randi's most famous cases as an investigator was the so-called Ben Veniste affair. In 1988, French immunologist Jacques Ben Veniste published a paper in Nature, one of the most prestigious science journals in the world, where he presented his idea of memory of water, which by and large supported the concept of homeopathy. This suggestion was immediately met with raised eyebrows from the scientific community, so an independent committee was sent to verify Ben Veniste's results. The committee consisted of a fraud investigator, Walter Stewart, Nature editor, John Maddox, and James Randi. They could not replicate the results, and the journal dismissed the original article, with Ben Veniste portraying himself as the victim of a witch hunt. Another of Randi's biggest targets was Peter Popoff, one of America's most popular televangelists during the 1980s, who made a fortune from acts of faith healing. Popoff would often call out attendees saying their names and their illnesses in front of a stunned audience. This was information he claimed to have received divinely, but Randi showed that it was simply fed to him by his wife through a hidden earpiece. Before his show started, Popoff collected this information either by having plants in the audience who chatted with the people around them, or by having attendees fill out prayer cards with all the details he needed. Once Randi had the evidence, he again turned to Johnny Carson, who was more than happy to expose Popoff on The Tonight Show. This led to a ton of negative publicity for the televangelist, and he declared bankruptcy in 1987. And yet Randi's most notable act, and arguably his most controversial, was something he called Project Alpha. Instead of an investigation targeting debunking specific paranormal claims, this was more of a hoax meant to show the world that scientists could be just as easily fooled by skilled tricksters as everybody else because they are not used to dealing with intentional deception. The whole thing started in 1979 when James McDonald, engineer and chairman of McDonnell Douglas Aircraft, used a $500,000 grant to establish the McDonnell Laboratory for Psychical Research. As McDonnell was a believer in the paranormal, those who shared his views expected this move to finally legitimize research into parapsychology. At first, Randi reached out to them with advice on how to create an efficient methodology and how to avoid getting conned. He even offered to act as a supervisor for the experiments, but his help was rebuffed. He then set out on a different path, intending to prove that the methodology used by the lab was flawed and susceptible to trickery. He did this with the help of two teenage magicians named Michael Edwards and Steve Shaw. The latter would ultimately adopt the stage name Banachek and has become one of Randi's most prominent proteges, even serving as the director for Randi's foundation. But for now, he and Edwards were just two skilled mentalists who were posing as psychics. Unsurprisingly, they soon became prize subjects at the McDonnell Laboratory, with nobody else getting results anywhere close to them. According to Randi, one important element of Project Alpha was that Shaw and Edwards would answer truthfully if they were ever asked if they were cheating, and they would come clean about the entire hoax. Apparently, they were never asked this once during the entire 4 years that they served as test subjects. Eventually, Randi revealed the deception in 1983 in an issue of Discover magazine. Reactions to the hoax were mixed and ranged from one extreme to the other. Some heavily criticized Randi for the deception, while others praised him and pointed out that it accomplished exactly what it set out to do, showing that scientists were not infallible and that they are not trained to deal with cons. His fellow Psychop members called it a landmark moment in the scientific study of paranormal phenomena. Meanwhile, the McDonnell lab lost its funding and was shut down a couple of years later. Although Randi was a prominent member of Psychop, it was his involvement with a different organization that brought him even more notoriety, particularly within the paranormal community. In 1996, he founded the James Randi Educational Foundation, or JREF. The company's missions were to continue investigating paranormal and other pseudoscientific claims while educating the public about skepticism and critical thinking. The JREF did a lot of different things to advance its goals. For over a decade, it hosted the largest annual conference of skeptics, known as the Amazing Meeting. It also gave out the Pegasus Award, semi-regular trophies mockingly offered to the biggest peddlers of woo-woo of that year. But the thing it is most famous for is the $1 million challenge, which would have paid out a prize of $1 million to anyone who could exhibit paranormal abilities under lab conditions. The idea first started in 1964 during a radio show when Randi was challenged by a parapsychologist to put his money where his mouth is. Randi agreed, although the prize was of course much smaller back then. He offered $1,000 to anyone who could show him supernatural powers during a controlled test. Randi liked the idea. After all, what better way was there for someone with genuine powers to prove themselves than by humiliating one of the country's leading skeptics and walking away with his money? He soon upped the offer to $10,000. Then, during the late 1980s, he was part of a television program where the prize was increased to $100,000, although the rest of the money was supplied by the broadcasting company. Eventually, thanks to a donation by internet entrepreneur Rick Adams, Randi permanently increased the prize to $1 million. Ever since the 1960s, around 1,000 people have tried taking Randi up on his offer. According to the official guidelines, the exact circumstances of the tests were agreed upon in advance by both parties and afterwards could not be changed no matter what. This was a big sticking point with Randi, who argued that way too often other supposedly scientific studies skewed their results in favor of the paranormal by accepting various excuses from their subjects and allowing them to change the tests on the fly. Under his stricter rules, none of the applicants have even passed the preliminary test, which is performed before the formal test that would certify the results. Most have failed it, others have just refused to take it. Randi's money challenges lasted for decades but went unclaimed. In 2015, the 87-year-old Randi retired from everything, from investigations, from the JREF. It was decided that it was about time that the money was put to better use, so the $1 million challenge was discontinued, and instead the JREF now awards grants to deserving people and non-profits. As for James Randi, he lived out his remaining years quietly before passing away in 2020, aged 92. Half-jokingly, he mentioned that his final wish would be to be cremated and have his ashes thrown in Uri Geller's eyes. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to check out Beard Blaze. There is a link to that below. And as always, thank you for watching.